Hi, everybody. It's Fran here. This is the first installment of my teaching on the Cloud of Unknowing, on the contemplative practice as taught in the 14th century Christian mystical classic known as Cloud of Unknowing. Interestingly, this book called The Cloud of Unknowing has an unknown author. We don't really know who the author was. We know reasonably well beyond doubt that it was a 14th century priest, just because of some references in the book. But beyond that, we really don't know. There's been a lot of conjecture about who the author is. There's some thought that it could be a Carthusian monk, because Carthusian monks were known to write various works and then keep them anonymous. The Carthusian life is a hermit life, lived in complete solitude. Um, they even live in solitude with each other. They live in hermitages that surround a church, and they meet together for office, but they do not meet together even for common work. So they're very, very solitary. And even to this day, when Carthusians write books, often it is authored by a Carthusian. That's the way the book reads in terms of identifying the author. They just have this ideal of living a very hidden life, um, kind of unheralded, unsung, you might say. So there's some conjecture it could be a Carthusian who are masters of contemplation, so that would make a lot of sense, but we really don't know. And in one way, it really doesn't matter. It's a great book. It has been really instrumental in my spiritual life. When I was a young monastic at the Abbey of Gethsemani, I heard about the Cloud of Unknowing and was asked to read it by my novice master. And I read it, and it had a very uh, big influence on me. The centering prayer movement, founded by the Cistercians or Trappists, is also based largely on the teaching found in the Cloud of Unknowing. So that's just a little bit of historical background. We don't really have a lot of historical background, but that's what we know. Um, so let's just get right into the teaching. The Cloud of Unknowing is a teaching on contemplation that is what we would call in the Christian mystical tradition apophatic. There are two strands of Christian mysticism, apophatic and cataphatic. Apophatic means the way of darkness, the way of negation, the way of unknowing, that God is such a complete mystery that we can never really know in any kind of intellectual, conceptual sense what God is or know God in that way. And the other strand of Christian mysticism is called cataphatic. Cataphatic is the way of light, the way of affirmation, the way you could say of doctrine, of defining God or giving a sense of the attributes of God, a kind of very affirmative, positive way of light where we can know certain things about God. We can know how to get into relationship with God, and so on and so forth. But the author of the Cloud is decidedly apophatic, as was Pseudo Dionysius, Meister Eckhart, John of the Cross. Many of them talk about darkness, unknowing, um, knowing God by unknowing. The author of the Cloud says that we can know uh, God by love, but we cannot know God with the intellect. And so the way of contemplation taught in the Cloud of Unknowing is this way of darkness. So the author just encourages us to sit before God and do the contemplative work. That's what he calls. The contemplative work is essentially intending toward the presence of God. It's all about having an intention of being consciously in the presence of God. But it starts out with, interestingly, a poetic image of this way of unknowing, which is a cloud. That the mystery that we call God is wrapped in a cloud, and we can never really know it. We can only pierce that cloud with an arrow of love, what the author of the cloud calls a blind stirring of love. Interestingly, the cloud of unknowing, the contemplative practice as taught in the cloud of unknowing, is the only meditational practice, one might say, that I know of that gives instruction through poetic imagery. I find that very interesting. Many meditation techniques, ways of contemplation, give instruction about how to go about doing the practice, but usually it's very sort of concrete and practical. Sit like this, hold your hands like that, think about this, consider this, visualize something or other, recite a mantra, so on and so forth. It gives instruction in that way. But the cloud of unknowing starts right from the start with this image of the cloud that wraps the mystery of God in unknowing. And what that instruction is giving to us, that sort of metaphor, is that, as the author says, all of our intellect, all of our knowledge, all of our beliefs, our philosophy, all of those things, while useful in certain ways, are useless when it comes to the contemplative work that he's encouraging us to take up. He basically says that we need to leave all these concepts and dogmas and ideas about God at the door. And we need to be willing to sit, simply sit before the cloud of unknowing and pierce it with an arrow of love, a blind stirring of love. There's a lot more to the practice than that, but we'll start there. And this will be our first installment, and we will continue on with the second installment very soon. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that this study of the Cloud of Unknowing proves to be very helpful to your spiritual journey. I know it was very helpful.